Like I was going through something, I watched your podcast, and it kind of put me in a different standpoint, and it took my mindset away from how many people were viewing it to how many people in lives we were impacting.
What up, what up, what up?
Hello.
We're back. Got a special great guest for you. And if you forgot, it's Freewenow.
Till it's backwards.
Yes, sirski. To now we free. Look, it's a great day to be here in San Diego. You know what's interesting? Before we start off, you know how I want you, everybody's like, how do you know when you're in your gift? Or how do you know when you're in your purpose? When you get re-energized when you're about to do what you're about to do. Whatever that is that you do for a living or for creativity, or content creation, whatever it may be, right? If you're pulling up to the place you're going to do it at, you walk into the studio. For instance, we walked into the studio. We were actually on a call, right? And I'm have this thing about efficiency lately where I kind of like, it's an ick of mine. I hate inefficient things going on. So the call, people were just rambling and ranting. I couldn't listen to it anymore. Keith is a great guy right here. Keith, he stayed on the call for us. You know what I'm saying? Held it down, right?
Had to hold it down because he definitely didn't want to.
Nah, I couldn't take it. I had to leave, right? Anyway, what I'm saying is that I was drained from that call, but then we got in here and I got re-energized. So that's how you know you're doing what you're supposed to do. But what you got for the people, Keith?
Hey, man, in a great month, as we know, it's Black History Month. I'm gonna give you a little something, right? So let's not forget the details in history, because though we cannot change the past, it seems that the details seem to fade, and the details are the most important thing about creating a bigger picture.
You know what we like to say? We're in a school zone. You gotta drive slow. Gotta drive slow. Can you give it to him one more time?
All right. In this wonderful month, right? Always remember, I'm gonna shorten it down this time, that the details are the most important thing in creating the big picture. Do not allow them to fade.
That's deep. That's deep right there. Y'all get that on the way home. So Auzi, man, how we doing, man? Welcome to the pod, man.
Dude, thank you guys for having me. We're doing great. That energy thing you said, I started YouTube 5 years ago. And I switched to the podcast about 8 months ago.
Okay.
And it was exactly that, where I felt after filming vlogs that it drained my energy. And I felt that podcast gave me energy. And another thing with that is that vlogs would take me out of the moment. So for example, like I'm hanging out with my friends and then I pull out my camera and now I'm like feeling this need to perform and I'm not focused on having a good time. So then the vlog would take me out of the moment. Whereas the podcast, if I didn't have a podcast, I wouldn't be sitting down talking with you guys. So it put me in moments that I wouldn't have. And then, yeah, just having work that energizes you and being able to bring that, 'cause I mean, if you just think about the general population, they come home for work and their energy falls on the people around them. And so, and everyone has to have a job. They have to make income. So if your work doesn't give you energy, that will therefore affect all your relationships and stuff.
Right. No, absolutely, man.
Hey, I think he touched on a big point. I'm gonna go ahead. I gotta go on this tangent. I couldn't let that slide by, right?
Yeah.
He talked about how when you come home, their energy is imparted into the people around them.
Right.
You don't understand that the things that you do that are external to your home life or wherever you're going, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family, whether it's just the surrounding moments. If you don't have something that energizes you, or if you have something that drains you, that is the energy you're imparting into the people around you. So that creates worse situations than you may supposed to be in, and that creates a separation of the life that you want and the life that you're actually living. So make sure whatever you're doing, it's giving you energy. You know what I'm saying? You feel good about doing it.
No, for sure. So Auzi, give the people a little background on yourself, you know, where you're from and how you're raised, and you know, we can even touch on how this even came about, you being here today.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm from Carlsbad, California.
Carlsbad?
Yeah.
No, nobody's ever said that.
Yeah, definitely not. I went to San Diego State University.
Okay.
2 years. I had the entrepreneurial bug. I wanted to be a YouTuber ever since I was in high school. And now that's becoming a fairly common, it's the most desired job amongst kids my age. But at the time I was one of maybe 5 kids in my high school, 5,000 people. I wanted to be a YouTuber, and I went to school and I didn't feel like it was meant for me. So I'd be sitting in class thinking, like this is a waste of my time. If I spent all this time that I am on school and staying up late, then I could make my dreams a reality. So I dropped out of school 2 years in. My parents were not happy with that.
How old are you?
I'm 22.
Okay.
So I've been dropped out of school for 2 years.
Okay.
But
Our camera guy Chuck, he actually you graduated from San Diego State, right?
Last year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for
go
sure.
Aztecs.
Yeah.
It's a great school, bro. I freaking love the school, but
I feel you.
not
This
for
wasn't for you.
Waste of time.
Yeah.
But my dropout story didn't look at. I thought I was going to drop out, just grind and become a big YouTuber. But what I realized, which I'll touch on with Soul Wealth, is that when I dropped out, I idolized work. So I looked at like getting 1 million subscribers as my source of happiness. I'll be happy when I get 1 million subscribers. And then I realized with my relationships with my girlfriend at the time and my friendships, I would be hanging out with people, but I'd be like, I need to get back to work. I need to get back to work. I need to get back to work, which I believe in hard work. But there's a point where you create a future reality for yourself and you compare it to your current situation. And then you're not happy in the now because you think that a future reality that you don't, first of all, you don't even know if you'll get there. But then second of all, you don't know that it's any better than where you're at, but you're using it to devalue your current moment. And I remember I asked myself if I had a moment where like my girlfriend at the time was like facing death. She had a very serious illness. And I asked myself, like, if I died, would I be happy with how the people around me memorized me? And I thought the answer was no, because everyone will remember me for like picking work over people, constantly going to work, constantly going to work, constantly going to work. And I was like, the Bible talks about that concept with the guy in the barn, and he builds up his treasures and storage. And then God says, you fool, you're going to die today and you're not even going to enjoy anything you did. So, but then there's on the other side, there's like, at San Diego State, I was in a frat partying, which was just like a waste of my time. Took away.
Yeah.
And so, but then I came up with the concept, I think the best entrepreneurs solve their own problems. So my problem was that I idolized work, like just always thinking about work, always thinking about the future, which can be good if you do it properly. So then I came up with the concept of soul wealth, which I told you guys before the podcast is based off my favorite Bible verse, Luke 16:9. Says, here's the lesson. Use your earthly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your worldly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. So the Bible says over and over again that our money will not go into the next life. Our status will not go into the next life.
Preach.
Our achievements will not go in the next life. But if we make friends in Christ, they will welcome us into heaven. And so now I try to measure success by relationships. And even like with the podcast, let's take any creative art form. So podcast, music, YouTube video. Think about the post button. People hit the post button and they're waiting to find out if they're successful. Based on how many views it gets, they'll decide if it was a good episode. Based on how many streams it gets, they'll decide if it was a good episode. Based on the money, they'll decide if it was a good episode. But those things are out of your control. What's in your control is before the post button. So I always say, if we create a relationship before you hit post, and if this is a good memory for you, then it's a success. Of course, I'm going to do my best to market it and to make it bigger and to grow, but those things don't define my success because they're not in my control.
Right. And I think we got the title of the episode, Before the Post.
Yeah.
Before the post.
Before the post.
I think actually that's a very big thing, right? Because that's something that me and Hasan had early on struggled with, right?
Yeah.
I still struggle with it.
You know what I'm saying? Like I would call him after we post a video and be like, bro, why do we only got 100 views? Like why only 5 people liked it, right? And then I started to become consumed by who was consuming our content, right?
Yeah.
To get that validation. And then I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody sent us a message and they were like, yo, your podcast has really helped me out. Like I was going through something, I watched your podcast and it kind of put me in a different standpoint. And it took my mindset away from how many people were viewing it to how many people in lives we were impacting. So it didn't matter if we got 1, 2, or 3 views. Like if somebody was to go into our video, look at it and get something out of it, that meant more than how many views or how many likes we got. So I kind of changed my mindset on that. But every once in a while I still look like, 2, 3 views.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard because you're operating a business.
Right.
You want to be successful. But even in that example, like Jesus left, he talks about leaving the 99 to go get the one. Maybe you guys are going to get the one, helping the one out. I also believe that like you feed your core fans, and then those fans will if you impact one person well enough, they will sell your show for you because they're going to go tell people about your show.
I agree.
So you got to just focus. I know that a lot of authors, when they write books, like, you know, you read a book and in the beginning of the book it says to my mom or to my friend. They write the book to one person, but it appeals to millions. For sure. So you got to define who are you trying to help. Like for me, it says people who idolize work, who
that central character,
the central cast a central character. That's what I literally read it in a book. But yeah.
No, for sure. And on that note, man, you know, casting a central character. I watched your latest one about it's not your charisma, right? And so
the conviction.
Yeah, for sure. And so you know gave 7 steps to become out there. I want to say backable, right?
Yeah,
backable. And so I guess talk a little bit about that since you already mentioned it about being backable and what that central character is, and just some things that people can, take away from, especially in the time that day and age we're in. You mentioned YouTube. Everybody has something that they're pushing. Everybody wants to be an influencer. Everybody wants to have their brand and their product. Everybody wants to, hey, watch this, watch what we're doing, right? So what are some advice for people to make whatever they're selling or branding backable?
Yeah, so the concept of being backable means how well can you get people to get behind your ideas? And it can be anything as small as, I know a lot of people my age, they want to get their parents to support them pursuing their dreams, or anything as big as, I have a company and I need millions of dollars of investing. How do you go into a room and get people to back you? And this is from a book called Backable by Sunil Gupta. And he talks about, he goes through all the most famous speeches in history. So Steve Jobs announcing the iPhone, it's one of the most famous speeches. But when you watch the speech, he's not a good speaker. He uses and then he goes to the most watched TED Talk. Same thing, 50 million views or whatever, but not a good speaker. And he says, why are these the greatest speeches of all time? If I were to ask you what makes you a good speaker, the most common answer would be confidence. Be more confident and charismatic, woo the crowd. But he says the reason these speeches were so impactful was because of conviction. The way you believe in what you do is how others will believe in it too. So Steve Jobs didn't have to be the best speaker. He knew his product was that good. He knew the iPhone would revolutionize the future. So his belief in the product comes through. And it's interesting because with confidence, you can point things out. Like if someone's closed off like this, they're generally not a confident person. If they talk quietly, they're generally not a confident person. But with conviction, there's not something to point it out. It's just how much you believe in what you do. You'll set the example for others to believe in it too. And that's why I liked him before the podcast saying like, I'm going to be in Africa one day and do a podcast with Burna, man, because people want to get behind great stories. So one of my podcast mentors, Danny Miranda, he just interviewed Mike Posner, Alex Hermosi. He's like killing it. And he constantly talks about one day how he's going to do the first live podcast in Madison Square Garden. But to himself, he doesn't idolize it. It's not like, oh, I need to do a podcast in Madison Square Garden. I need to sell it out. It's not like he looks at it like that, but he constantly mentions it because when guests hear it, when they look at his show and they hear him saying, I'm going to do a podcast in Madison Square Garden, I'm going to do a podcast in Madison Square Garden, they think to themselves, I want to go on his show before that happens. It's like, I want to be a part of the story before.
I want to be the day one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if people associate,
that day one effect.
If they believe that you believe you're going to do these things, then they're more likely to want to be a part of your story.
I think that's very big, right? Because we talk about how you're supposed to speak things into your life, right? And you speak it, you do it, and it becomes good if you listen to what God says, right? He tells you to do something, you do it, becomes good, right? But that is even more important than your everyday life, right? Because you don't want to speak negatively about the things that you're trying to pursue, right? You want to talk about the things that you're trying to do. You want it to embody it. You want it to become a part of who you are, right? So I thought that was very important because one of your podcasts, I believe, is the one you dropped at the beginning of the year. You alluded to how you have these ideas of things you want to do with your podcast that people see as impossible, as in doing the first podcast in space or doing an interview with Kim Jong-un, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people would hear this and they'd be like, there's no way that you can do that, right? But the fact that you believe in that and you think that will happen, it comes to pass. And you also said like, your faith in God allows you not to become consumed by it, but to believe those are things that are truly going to happen. Talk about that.
Yeah. Rick Rubin, you guys know Rick Rubin.
Mm-hmm.
For the audience, he's credited as one of the most famous music producers of all time. He's worked with the Beastie Boys, Johnny Cash, Kanye West, Jay-Z. He helped Mac Miller do his last 2 albums, Swimming in Circles. He's credited as one of the greatest music producers of all time, but he doesn't know how to play an instrument and he doesn't know how to use any music software. So why is he the greatest music producer of all time? He'll go into the studios and he just gets people to think different. He goes, I feel you're being a little bit insecure here. Maybe we should go on a walk before this recording session. Maybe we should sit in some flowers. And he talks about how ideas exist in 2 places. Like they're first real in your imagination and then they're next real in the real world. And I think that's interesting. It's like your imagination, the real world has limits, but your imagination doesn't have limits. And I don't know, like if I will do a podcast on space or if I will interview Kim Jong-un one day, but like if you put the limits there, then it can become quite literally anything. As far as the Bible, something interesting in James 4, it talks about do not say I'm going to go to this town, spend a year and make this much money. Otherwise you are boasting about your own plans and all such boasting is evil. And so that is like a very scary quote too, because I hear that and it's like, I don't want to be running around saying I'm going to be a podcaster and I'm going to make this much money and I'm going to do this because if I'm not dedicating it to God's will, he says that's evil. And so I just say like, God, I want to be a podcaster. It seems that the events have led me to this in my life. I'm going to do my best at it, but whatever you want, whatever your will is. And yeah, so it's funny because those are such like opposite worlds of just being like, I can literally do anything in the podcast space and then being like, but God, I would rather your will reign over mine. And I actually have more belief because of God, because if you really believe that God created everything around you and the atoms and the cells and the earth, then to say that God could use me to do an interview with Kim Jong-un is like, that's way more fathomable than creating the heavens and the earth.
Absolutely.
So
in 6 days and resting on the 7th. You know what I'm saying?
So really God gives me that debate because I look at the things he did and I'm like, anything I want to do in my life is so insignificant to what God has done that
for sure
it's possible.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think you hit on a couple of things, man. The last one you mentioned is basically aligning what you think your plan is or what God's plan is, right? And so I think we've experienced that in our own environment, right? At one point, Keith and I were kind of like throwing parties.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and we were on the corner.
Group chat.
Yeah. Shout out to group chat. But we were throwing parties, man. And we were passing out flyers, trying to get people to do it. You know what I mean? And like come perform. And it was actually kind of dope, right?
Yeah.
But I still didn't get the feeling that I get when I come into the studio. You know what I mean? And even after one episode that we did, and it was pretty deep, that like even Keith and I like were leaving the studio and we got choked up about it. Like we got emotional. You know what I'm saying? And it was like we've tried so many different things, and for us to now finally have found it, it shows us that like we also had to, like you said, submit our will to God and say, hey, whatever you want us to do, God, like we're trying a lot of different things. We have kind of been ignoring you and always saying, hey, I have this, I have this, I have this, or can you do this, can you do this, as almost treating God as like he's a Siri or Alexa, right? Can you do this?
Siri.
Hey, can you do it? You know what I mean?
That's funny.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, it's true for sure.
but instead now I think we have finally gotten to the point where, hey, what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
Right. And then aligning that with, like you said, now it seems like all the events are leading to this. That was huge. And I think that's something that, you know, people need to take heed to and listen to, and not just like, oh, okay, that was a cool point. Like, no, this is really how you become successful. Because I think you can only be successful when your purpose aligns with, I guess, the levels that you're reaching. Because you can make $1 million, $1 billion, or whatever, and still not be satisfied. So I think when you're satisfied is when you align that with your purpose. And then the second thing is that self-help, right? Like we mentioned it earlier, I'm like a self-help junkie.
Same.
You know what I'm saying? Like I love self-help. But every verse that you've mentioned, right? And every verse that I go in the Bible and I read, like for instance, in Proverbs, it's like your gifts will make room for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like people don't understand that the Bible is the original self-help book.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
all self-help derives from the Bible.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to see that, like, people sometimes think of like the Bible as a church aspect, but not as a aspect to become successful in life. And I think that's an attribute of the Bible that people miss out on, is that like, if the Bible is so important because it works, it gets results. You know what I mean? Like, truthfully, if it didn't work, I probably would subscribe to something else, right? But the fact that it actually works and it gets results, because God is a God that works and gets results, you have to subscribe to it. You know what I mean?
Well, there's two interesting things there. One is I heard a definition of sin yesterday that's very interesting. And it essentially said, sin is thinking that sin is thinking that what God has in store for your life is not the best possible plan for your life. So like I'll give you an example. It's like a lot of people want to have sex before marriage, and they think, if I have sex before marriage, my life is going to be more enjoyable. Or the reverse is more common, where someone's in college and they say, I'm a Christian, but I don't want to refrain from sex before marriage because I don't actually think that's better for my life. They look through the other rules. They say, thou shalt not murder. And they can fathom that. Oh, my life would be better if I don't murder. My life would be better if I don't steal. But then they get to these other ones like sex before marriage, and they're like, they don't actually believe it. They think that their plan is better than God's. And so people see sin as like this rule, but and in the other religions, you follow rules, and then at the end of your days, God judges you, and he says, if you're good enough, I'll let you into heaven. But in our religion, we believe that Mark 2:17 says, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I've come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. It compares healthy people to people who think they are righteous. That everyone needs the doctor. You guys are all sick people, but only the people who know they're sick will call on it. And so, where was I going with this? Oh, so sin, it's like it's not just like this rule where you're choosing to do something that your body wants, which yes, it is that, but why it's easier for devout Christians to follow the rules is not because they're like these crazy disciplined people. It's because they know that God has the best in mind for them, and they're surrendering to the fact that if God wants something for me, it's the best for my life. And even like switching from YouTube to this podcast, they're very similar mediums, but to me, it was the biggest deal in the world because my whole life I told myself I'm going to be a YouTuber, I'm going to be a YouTuber, I'm going to be a YouTuber. And then even when I switched to the podcast, I had this like worry, am I just reframing my creative outlet and doing it for me? But then God showed me a bunch of stuff, and I do think he's supporting this route. But even going into the future, it's like, if God wants me to do something else, Like if God wanted me to quit my podcast, that would be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason it's hard is because you think that your plan is better than his. But every time you look back in your life, it's never been that way. So why would it be that way?
It is now.
Be that way in the
absolutely.
future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really think that no matter how long it takes you to get to your portion, right, like, or your journey, you'll eventually get to it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think, like you said, when you view life as in your way, right, and you pick and choose what parts of the Bible I'm going to follow, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, all right, I won't kill anybody because I know I shouldn't do that, right? I won't steal because I know I shouldn't do that. But when it comes to sex before marriage, I can't get along with that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that goes along with the topic of like, your journey is kind of based off of how you surrender to what God is telling you to do, right? Which is why it took me and Hasan so long to get to this area, right? We have been recording podcasts for years on end before even starting to put it out. And it kind of felt like we were being drawn to this thing and we were being told to do something, but we wouldn't commit to it. For sure. We would try to find our own way through it without acknowledging what the truth was of the matter. Right, what our journey was really meant for us to be going along. So I think once you start getting on that journey, that's when the things in your life start to become easy, right? And I'm not saying easy in a sense as nothing becomes hard anymore. Life is always hard, right? Being committed to the Bible, being committed to the God, being committed to these different things in your life, it's hard because it takes work, right? You have to avoid these distractions. You have to avoid backsliding. It's hard in that sense, right? But easy because the opportunities are gifted to you, right? Yeah. Like I don't think there's no way on earth that we would be sitting here having this podcast had we have not started it, right? We wouldn't be sitting here with you, right? You wouldn't be doing what you were doing had you not listened to the things that were being said to you or committing or surrendering to God's will. So you got to understand, like, it starts with that commitment and understanding that though you may have slip ups and though you may have these misdirections, you'll get back to your journey. And that's when the things will start to become easy in your life. That's when the opportunities will start to display themselves. That's when you'll start to see the things that you didn't see before. Like the things you were blinded to will become clear and you'll be like, how did I miss this the whole time? Right. Like, how did I not understand this was here waiting for me?
Right. No, absolutely. And so, and I guess thinking about like God's creation, what God created, I mean, you film a lot of your podcast outside.
Yeah.
So what was the strategy or, inclination to do that?
Well, I always ask myself when I have a disadvantage, how can I make this my greatest advantage? And it sounds so silly because it's just taking one thing and saying the opposite about it, but it's always true. So for example, people will use mental health. The most common one is like ADHD and OCD, and they'll be like, oh, I have ADHD, I can't focus, or I have OCD. Like they'll just throw it around. But like even me, like I think I have OCD, but the only reason I'm willing to say that I have OCD is because I think of it as a positive thing. It helps me to be very disciplined because with OCD, when things are out of place, it bothers you. So then I can take that to my habits, like say reading the Bible in the morning, and when I don't do it, I'm bothered by it. And I'm okay with that bothering. When I don't go to the gym, I'm okay with that bothering. So OCD is a superpower to me. That's how I see it. But so it goes, I'm 22, I'm a college dropout, I don't have money. How am I going to get studio time? How am I going to get these equipments? Okay, I look. In that Rick Rubin book I mentioned earlier, he said, if you're a painter and you start your painting by getting a canvas, like the white wrapped around the 4 pieces of wood, you've assimilated yourself to 99% of paintings the second you buy the canvas. If you film your podcast indoors, you've assimilated yourself to 99% of podcasts. But now I'm going to go film every podcast outdoors. I'm going to be different from 99% of podcasts, and I'm not going to have to spend the money. But then there's the issue of everything comes with these issues. People might not take you as serious because they're like, this person doesn't have a studio, this person. So then I'm trying to get ahead. Again, how can I make this disadvantage my greatest advantage? So I start telling people before the podcast, take me to a place that's personal to you. And so they think the outside thing is about, I often encourage people to take me to a park they grew up at, or the beach if that's where they got away, or their secret spot. And so now it's like something personal to them. It invokes memories and stuff. But in reality, yes, that is my intention. But in reality, I just can't pay for a studio. And so I'm always thinking about how can you use your greatest disadvantage to your advantage.
Man, that's so when you say that, right, using your disadvantages to your advantages, it reminds me of this story in the Bible, and I forget where it was, but basically there was a man that was been paralyzed for like 38 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so, every once I think a season, right, the pool would become super holy.
Yeah.
And whoever's the first person to get in the pool, they would get healed. Right.
That was the thought. Yes.
Yes. And so this guy would kind of like was paralyzed and had been there 38 years, never dipped into the pool.
Yeah.
Right. Never dipped into the pool. And so eventually, Jesus sees this guy just laying by the pool, and the guy says, Jesus, why are you sitting there? Like, what's going on? He was like, well, I don't have anybody to help me get into the pool. And then Jesus replies, do you want to be healed?
Yeah.
And my thing is like, man, that's kind of like a rude thing to say. Like, does he want to? Of course he wants to be healed. He's been paralyzed for 38 years.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He needs somebody to get him in the pool. Get him in the pool, Jesus. You know what I'm saying? But like, Jesus is like, a lot of times people focus so much on their disadvantages that they don't even take the steps that they can take to change their life for the better. So like Jesus was like, hey, I didn't ask you what your disadvantages were. I can see that you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
I can see, obviously, you would like somebody. It would be easier for somebody to dip you in the pool.
Yeah.
He just asked him, do you want to be healed? And then the guy finally is like, yes. And he was like, rise up and walk. And so when he rises up and walks, he starts carrying the thing, he was like sitting on like a pallet or whatever, but he starts carrying the same thing that was at once his disadvantage, and now he's carrying it on his back. Right? So that story kind of reminds me of you using the disadvantage of paying for studio time, you know what I mean, and having the illustrious equipment or whatever, right? And you're like, I don't have all that, but what I can do is use my disadvantages to make an advantage. And also I can even bring the guest in and make it personal to them, right? So now they're not even thinking about, oh, this is a disadvantage. They're thinking of like, oh wow, he's really like, like this is a great thing to do. Like, I've never had this before. This guy's actually above the 99%.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he's doing something different. And Rick Rubin, man, I got turned on to Rick Rubin through Jay-Z.
Yeah.
Jay-Z is my favorite artist. And Jay-Z has a documentary called Fade to Black. And in the documentary, it goes through Jay-Z producing and recording their album, and Rick Rubin is one of the producers. Yeah. And so you get an inside look into how just all of the different idiosyncrasies, we'll call them, that Rick Rubin has, and what makes him such a great producer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what's important too, what y'all are talking about, just to continue not to beat a dead horse, as they would say, but how your disadvantages turn into your advantages. A lot of times people don't realize that their disadvantages their disadvantage makes them better at what they have perceived other people's advantages are. So you talk about somebody that's blind, somebody that can't hear, somebody that can't walk, right? When somebody is blind, the rest of their senses have to be so elevated, it makes them better in a sense at these different things, right? So I can't see, but I can see you through the way that I hear you, right? You take more time, you take more training, you take more persistence, you put so much more into all these other things to support your perceived disadvantage of sight. It makes you so much better, and you hear things, you feel things, you understand things that people with sight overlook. Right. The people that have the ability to see no longer see because they're so used to having that advantage that they don't understand what it is to live without, right? So you have to understand that though you start with this disadvantage, the things that you build up to support what you perceive as the reason you're not as good as somebody else could make you 10 times better than them. You have to understand, like, I really feel like people that don't have the actual ability to sight take more importance on all of their other senses, and they see way better than us in a different sense, right? And y'all have to understand that, like, this perceived disadvantage is not that. It will be if you allow it to be. If you allow it to be the crutch, right? If you allow it to be in a sense, the wheelchair that you ride on, and you don't take advantage of the things around you that are even better.
That's deep. That's deep. And, and the podcast is called Freewenow, right? Till it's backwards.
Till it's backwards.
until now we free, right? So as we're talking about things, right, like I can imagine you as the listener, right? You guys are nodding your head, right? Like, wow, that's some good stuff. But like, please take the opportunity to assess your own life. What have I been complaining about? What excuses have I given myself that should really be, the strategy that I use to take advantage of my disadvantages, right? Like, where in my life have I kind of just, been sitting down, being couch potato Betty, right? When I should, be productive, right? Because God loves productive people as well, right? Like, you think of the story about the guy with 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1. The person with 1 talent hid it, and everybody else brought it back 2 times as much, right? And so God then says to the one person that hid their 1 talent, he called him slothful, right? He called him wicked, right? So like, you have to know that, yeah, your talents, advantages, and disadvantages may not be like Keith's or Auzi's or like mine, right? But at the same time, everybody has them. So what are you doing to use them? You know what I mean? Like, you have to further the kingdom through your gifts and through your abilities and through your purpose.
I think there's another interesting in that first Bible story you shared with the paralyzed guy. When he's looking at the spring water, presumably in the story they pose it as being a random thing. Like the spring randomly bubbles up and then whoever can jump in it first might be healed. And I think the paralyzed guy is a metaphor for us in the sense that, like, the Bible constantly compares slavery to sin. Like, we are slave to our sinful nature. And so it's like that guy, he can't walk or whatever. He's paralyzed. He's physically not free, but he's waiting for the water to bubble up. And I feel in our lives, the water bubbling up can be anything we idolize. If we think we're going to get $1 million and that's going to make us free, or if we think we're going to get a wife and that's going to make us free, or we think that money is going to make us free, and Jesus comes and I believe that Jesus is freedom. You don't have to get anywhere, earn anything to have freedom. Jesus is knocking on the door of your heart, and if you open up to him, you can be free right now. And out of your freedom, people take that and they think that means that you won't be ambitious because you just accept it. But if you think about any good thing in your life, gigo is a word I think about a lot. It means garbage in, garbage out. If you eat garbage food, you'll have garbage energy. If you consume garbage content, you'll have garbage thoughts. So if thinking about this in terms of Jesus, if you know that you can be free right now, then that will flow into your work. It will flow into what you do. It's like if you've ever found $100 bill in your pocket and then you just get happy and you're nicer to all the people around you and you work better that day, or you get a text from some girl you like and it goes into all your work. And it's like knowing that Jesus loves me even when I'm lazy. Jesus loves me even when I'm broken, even when I sin, even when I do this. And if you truly believe that concept, then it will make you want to go do everything at the highest level. Because and again in the Bible it has that story where the girl comes into the Pharisee's house and she's a prostitute. She starts cleaning Jesus's feet, and the Pharisee, the religious guy, doesn't even say anything out loud, but he thinks, oh, Jesus must not be a prophet, because if he was a prophet, he would not be letting this disgusting girl clean his feet. And he, hearing the guy's thoughts, says, who has more love, the person who has been forgiven 1,000 times, or the person who has been forgiven 5 times? And the Pharisee says, the person who's been forgiven 1,000 times. And he's saying, truly, I tell you, this girl is forgiven for her sins because she loves me more than you. And what he's saying is that if you understood how much Jesus loved you and you understood how sinful in your nature, then that would go into everything. That's why this prostitute's running in this house trying to clean Jesus's feet, because she knows that I'm forgiven. Right. And so that's like such a interesting concept of, like, you receive from God first and then it goes out. You don't do these things and then, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting concept, right? Just to take it on a little bit more base level, right? I can't remember where this comes from, right? But there was a man who says, hey, if you knew that you had 50 no's to get to the $1 million that you've been working all your life, you would get through those 50 no's in no time, right? And that's how you should live your life, as if you have 50 no's. But there's people who don't understand the concept that their work is getting them towards their goal, right? They don't see they don't see the finish line, right? They're waiting for that random occurrence or the bubbling of the water to start to prepare. They're like, all right, once this happens, then I'll be ready to go for this. Once Jesus comes back, then I'll stop sinning, or once I get this new car, then I'll start doing these certain things, right? You have to understand that these things don't start when this random occurrence happens. It starts now. Like you have to work to when that random occurrence happens. You're not preparing, you're prepared. You're performing at that point, right? And if you don't take that time, right, like you said, to be forgiven 1,000 times, then when that moment comes, you're not going to understand how to value it, how to truly deal with that moment, right? Something I told Hasan, right? I was like, imagine if somebody would have gave us $100 million for our podcast right now. I said, we would completely destroy it.
Yeah.
Right.
We would completely blow it off. Like, we would destroy what we're building right now because we're not ready for that type of moment, right? Because we haven't took the time to prepare, to perfect our craft, to perfect what we're doing, to perfect the reason behind it, to perfect how much we believe in it. So if we're just gifted it and just waiting for that random occurrence, how are we gonna misuse or abuse the gift we've been given? So it takes you that time to constantly prepare, to be forgiven thousands of times, to understand that it takes more to be this person or more to do this thing, and that it's not about the views, that it's not about looking down on other people, that it's not about being the most successful person, but it's about the reason that you're put here. So it's about the gift, right? And if you get this random occurrence randomly, or you wait for that, then you'll never understand the true value of what the gift took.
So on that note of having freedom in Jesus, right? And it seems like your faith is like a huge part of your life, right?
Definitely now, yes.
Yes, right. So I guess for the viewer and for us as well, I think a lot of times we don't see the overlap of faith and business, faith in entrepreneurship, faith in your gifts and whatever you're doing or putting out as content to the world. So where did your, I guess, comfortability or confidence or conviction, right, come from on being able to give digestible content, right, while also spreading your faith in God?
Yeah, that's interesting. I have, and I think you guys, from what I can tell, have an interesting view on sharing faith, because I actually I never title my podcast anything to do with God, Jesus, or the Bible, because when I was a lukewarm Christian, I grew up Christian. So I technically was a Christian my whole life, but I don't think I really believed it until about 2 years ago. And throughout my life, since I got my iPhone, since the dawn of TikTok and social media, I identified as Christian, and I didn't get Christian content recommended to me once, except Easter and Christmas. So if me, who identifies as a Christian, isn't getting served Christian content, then what that tells me is the algorithms are so accurate, they're only going to serve Christian content to people who want that content, which that's why the algorithms work so well. But who needs that content? Probably not the people who already believe it. There's so many there's a million resources for someone who's a Christian to become a stronger Christian. They can pray, they can read their Bible, go to church, watch apologetics on YouTube, follow Christian creators. But how many resources will reach the person right now who thinks that that their career is going to bring them fulfillment? That's America. America, we idolize our career. So many people fall in that category. How will content land in front of them that they enjoy, that will add value to their current desires, but then it will also show them Christ? How will the frat kid at my school, he's not going to get any Christian content recommended to him. So that's where like the idea of soul wealth, it's like most people who aren't Christian aren't going to get behind the idea of Jesus and the Bible right away. But most people I've found love the idea of measuring success by relationships, because they're like, oh, that's a cute idea. Like girls like it. They're like, oh, that's so like deep. And guys are like, business relationships, you're the product of the 5 most people. So that message hits. I always tell people I would never sell something I wouldn't buy myself. I would never come on a podcast and start talking about Jesus if I didn't believe Jesus was the solution to someone's problems. And confidence wise, I even think that there will be a day where talking about Jesus will negatively affect my career, because the Bible says, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. If you see people at the highest levels talking about God, they get criticized. I mean, Kanye, which he's on like a whole, like, I don't know if we can call him a Christian at the moment, but even when he started talking about God, everyone started hating on him. When you introduce God, I mean, there's two forces that run the world, God and the enemy. And the enemy does not want God to be thrown on the highest scale. And so my mom used to always say, more levels, more devils. And that's where it's interesting, because in one sense, like prosperity gospel, what is prosperity gospel says that if I follow Jesus, my life will be better. And then you have people like Joel Osteen and the mega church pastors that are buying private jets with their church money. And people look at that and they go, prosperity gospel isn't true. Like, and I also don't believe it's true. And I'll tell you why. If you look at Jesus, he followed the Bible better than anyone ever. And look what happened in his life. He was beaten, murdered, killed, despised. So, wouldn't make sense in that terms, but it is true in the sense that you are prosperous when you follow the Bible. You're just not prosperous in the way that you think prosperity is. It's not money. Yes, you might get money, because chances are if you follow the Bible, you're going to make better decisions. And chances are if you make better decisions, you'll have better financial results. Chances are but what it tells you is that you'll get the fruits of the spirits. You'll get peace, understanding, joy. Every single one of the apostles died horrible deaths. And they followed the Bible better than most of us. But Acts 5:41 says the apostles left the high council rejoicing that God had counted them worthy to suffer disgrace for the name of Jesus. These apostles were thrown in prison and beaten, and then they walked out of being imprisoned and beaten joyful. They were like amped, like we are for this podcast, because they said, God counted me worthy to suffer disgrace for the name of Jesus. And you have people who make $1 million and they come home and they give worse energy than that to their family because their prosperity in money and in possessions and achievements isn't real prosperity. So prosperity gospel is true, but it's not true in the way we think of prosperity. It's true in the fact that if you ask everyone what's the goal of life, like half the people will tell you to be happy. Happiness is outside in. So happiness says, if I find $100 in my pocket, I'm happy. And then I go to spend the $100, it's fake, I'm sad. It's outside in. Joy is inside out. It's regardless of what happens to me, I am exuding happiness out of me. That even if I get thrown in prison and if I'm getting beaten, because I know Jesus, because I know where I'm going, because I know who I'm serving, because I know that I'm loved, I'm going to be happy. And then I think that oftentimes it does result in the money, in the success, because like we said, the Bible is the original self-help book. If you're not idolizing sex and you're making better decisions and you're generally, those things will become success in your life. But it is very interesting because a lot of the most devout and best practicers of Jesus's teachings have the hardest, most suffering lives. But that doesn't mean they're not very, very joyful and have inner peace and confidence in what they're doing.
No, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting take. You know what I mean? And especially on the prosperity gospel side. And I'll have to do more research on that too, because I didn't even know about the apostles and their deaths. You know what I mean? So that's some homework for myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I need to do and learn about that. And also, I've heard about prosperity preaching and prosperity gospel. So I think I need to do research for myself and actually become, I guess, immersed in learning what prosperity gospel is, because I've heard it from different preachers and pastors and, whatever title you want to give them. And, it's just interesting, different perspectives about it.
Yeah, most definitely. Because I need a lot of education on that too as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So go ahead.
I was going to say that's just a very good, skill to just say you don't know. I feel like in our culture, everyone wants to know They want to be like, give my opinion on this, say this or this, but just to be able to say, I've not done enough research to give an opinion is very a respectable trait.
Yeah, most definitely. I think one quotes I try to live by is that there's no such thing as a dumb question. The only dumb question is the one that is unasked.
Yeah.
So it's so important to understand when you don't know anything. Like, and I feel like the more you know, the less you understand you actually know.
Right.
So you gotta keep educating yourself and consuming this stuff to really live by it or work with it.
Yeah, you're so right. It's so funny because the more you become educated, generally the people who are the most confident in their art are the most humble. Generally, the people who are the most educated about God think they know the least because they understand that, oh, God like is so great that it's unfathomable. But and that goes along with whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave to everyone else. As you ascend the ranks, I mean, Jesus literally took the lowest position. He cleaned Judas's feet right before Judas took him to get betrayed him to be killed. And so it is interesting how much educating yourself and ascending actually looks like descending and admitting how much you don't know and how much you need to learn.
No, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Man, this was a great pod, man. We had a couple more questions. Did you want to get any other questions off of the list real quick?
Nah, man. Honestly, I think that was good, man. That was a lot of stuff covered. Honestly, I learned so much. Like I said, I come in these podcasts and I learned so much that I didn't even consider prior to coming in here. So that I feel like that shows that we're on the right path, that I'm educating myself about stuff that I have no idea about.
For sure. Auzi, man, do you have anything that you want to plug, man? Your podcast, anything that's coming down the pipeline soon that you want the people to know about?
Respectfully Inspired on all platforms. There's video on Spotify and YouTube, but it exists on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. My Instagram is Auzi.films, YouTube Auzi.films. I do vlogs and stuff like that. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. Hey, it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, actually, so we didn't last thing before we go, we didn't touch on how we even connected.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you want to touch on that real fast?
Okay, you had Andrew Gonzalez. He's the right-hand man for Jeff Fenster, the founder of Everbowl. You had him on your podcast, and I was about to have him on my podcast, so I went to do research, and you were the only other podcast that I could find him on besides his own. And so I watched it, and I was like, dude, this podcast is really good. These guys are Christian. They're Christian, but they also touch on self-help and business, and they're in the variety of kind of the same world I'm in, and I really enjoyed it. So I hit you guys up, and luckily you guys wanted to have me on, so that was a blessing.
No, for sure. And we acted quick, too, because it was like, oh, we could push it out. It was like, no, let's get it done. You know what I mean? So like you said, man, relationships are huge. This is a successful podcast based on the relationships that were built, based on the value that was exchanged, you know what I mean, and transactional value that we had. So super excited about this, super excited for you guys to watch it again, share it to people. And that's another thing. The difference between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, okay? The Dead Sea has an inlet but no outlet. The Red Sea has an inlet and an outlet, right? That's why it's called the Dead Sea. So if you want to grow, right, if you want to be alive, if you want to get to new levels, you have to share, and you have to not just take in and consume information, but if somebody helps you with something, share it to somebody else, right? And I'm not just saying that because of, hey, share my podcast so we can grow, right? That's part of it, right? But the second part, the deeper part, is that if you want to grow personally, right, you notice the most successful people are the most willing to share. A lot of rich people are some of the most unselfish people that I know. You know what I mean? So you have to share if you want to grow. You know what I mean? So it's Freewenow
till it's backwards.
Yes, sirski.
No!